You ever wake up to a sound that makes your bones remember fear before your mind does? That's how the night began. The night that changed my name from Mom to Plaintiff. I'm Kate Mercer, 63, retired accountant, volunteer at a women's shelter on the East Side. I spend my days teaching women how to budget and start over after bad marriages. Never thought I'd end up needing the same lessons myself. If you're listening to me now, do one small thing for me. Drop a heart in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Because once you hear what happened at 3 a.m. in my own home, you'll understand why I stopped believing family always means safety. The first thing I noticed wasn't noise. It was cold air. Too cold for March. The kind that slips through a door left open. I sat up, heart thudding, thinking maybe the heater kicked off again. Then I heard it, paper rustling, slow and deliberate, like someone turning pages in a hurry to find one thing. I grabbed my robe and padded down the hallway. The light from my study door cut a narrow stripe across the floor. Inside, Kendra, my daughter-in-law, stood in her robe, had bent over my desk, rifling through a stack of folders. At first, I thought she was sleepwalking. "Kendra," I said softly, "what are you doing in my office at this hour?" She didn't flinch. "Couldn't sleep," she said, voice calm, too calm. "I just needed a pen." Her hand hovered over my financial files, mortgage papers, insurance forms, old contracts. The same ones I'd looked through that afternoon when I noticed numbers that didn't add up. My pulse kicked. "Those aren't for you to touch." I told her. "Please step away from my desk." Her eyes met mine, eyes I'd once trusted. They looked hollow now, the kind you see on people who've already decided what you're worth. "Everything in this house belongs to us now, Kate." The word "us" hit hard. Us. I repeated. She smiled, small, smug. "You and Maurice had your turn. It's our time to manage things." I took a step forward. "I never gave you that right." "Oh, but you did," she said, waving a folder like a victory flag. "Remember signing those forms Maurice brought last month? I just needed to check that the signatures match." I reached for the folder. She pulled it back. Papers fluttered to the floor. "Stop this nonsense." I snapped, and that's when it happened, so fast my brain couldn't keep up. She reached for the gold pen lying on my desk, the one I gave her last Christmas with her initials engraved on it. For a second, I thought she was pointing it to threaten me. Then the pain came, sharp, searing deep in my shoulder. I gasped, stumbling backward. Blood ran warm down my arm. When I looked up, Maurice stood in the doorway, bare-chested, eyes glazed with sleep, or maybe disbelief. "Help me," I begged. He smirked, voice low and casual. "You're so dramatic, Mom." That laugh burned deeper than the wound. I reached for my phone, fingers shaking. My vision blurred, the room spinning. I hit the screen, not even sure what I pressed, only that the phone vibrated once in my hand. Kendra's face hovered above me, calm, calculating. "No one's going to believe you," she whispered. Somewhere outside, the neighbor's motion light blinked on, washing the curtains with pale blue light. For a moment, our shadows crossed the wall, hers tall and sharp, mine hunched and fading. Then everything went dark. Have you ever woken up and realized the world around you already agreed on a story that wasn't yours? That's how I opened my eyes, floating between pain and confusion, the beeping of a heart monitor tapping out a lie I hadn't told. The ceiling lights were blinding white, the kind you see in surgery scenes on TV. My shoulder throbbed like it was on fire. I tried to speak, but the air felt thick, my throat raw. A voice beside me said, "Don't move, Mom. You felt pretty bad." It was Maurice. For a second, relief flickered, until I saw the way he looked at me, calm, rehearsed, eyes darting to the nurse behind him. "Where's Kendra?" I whispered. He smiled too quickly. "She's right outside filling out your forms. The doctor said you'll be fine. Just a little accident." Accident. That word scraped through me like sandpaper. I turned my head, saw the bandage on my shoulder, layers of white gauze over what I knew was a stab wound. I opened my mouth, but Morris's tone shifted. Gentle warning. "Let's not make a scene, okay? You tripped in your office, hit something sharp. That's what we're telling them. You were dizzy, remember?" The nurse glanced up from her chart. Something in her eyes told me she didn't believe him. Still, I nodded weakly. "Right, dizzy. For now, I play along." Kendra walked in, all soft smiles and careful makeup, the picture of concern. She touched my hand like we were in a movie. "Oh, Mom, we were so scared. You really frightened us." I wanted to snatch my hand back, but the 4-line tugged against my wrist. Her perfume, gardenia too sweet for night, made me nauseous. The doctor entered, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Mercer, you're lucky. The wound missed the artery by half an inch." He looked at Maurice. "She should rest for a few days. No heavy lifting." Kendra nodded before I could speak. "Of course, doctor. We'll take care of everything." They asked about pain, about dizziness, about what I remembered. Every answer I gave, Kendra corrected before the sentence left my lips. "She slipped," she said. "She gets lightheaded sometimes. She's been under stress." Each lie wrapped tighter around me until I felt buried alive under politeness. When the doctor left, the nurse lingered. Her name tag said, "R. Jameson." She adjusted the 4 and leaned close, voice barely above a whisper. "You remember how this happened, don't you?" I didn't answer. I just looked at her. Maybe something in my eyes told her the truth, because she nodded and scribbled something quick in her chart before leaving the room. Maurice checked his phone, pacing. "Police might drop by," he said casually. "We'll tell them it was a fall. No reason for anyone to make this dramatic, right?" Kendra's hand brushed my hair like a mother soothing a child. "Rest now. We've got everything handled." I stared at the ceiling, forcing my breathing to stay slow, steady. If they believed I was too weak to argue, they'd talk freely around me. And they did. As night crept in, I kept my eyes half closed while they whispered near the window. "Maurice, you cleaned the pen?" "Kendra, yes. It's gone. Focus on the story." "Maurice, you almost ruined everything." "Kendra, you told me to handle it." My heart pounded, but I didn't move. If I reacted, they'd know I heard. The nurse came back later for vitals. Kendra tried to stop her from checking the wound. "She's resting." Jameson smiled politely but firm. "I'm just doing my job." She peeled back a bit of gauze and frowned. "This isn't from a fall." Kendra's face stiffened. "Are you a detective or a nurse?" Jameson wrote something in the chart, calm as stone. "Just documenting what I see." After they left, the hallway lights dimmed. Machines hummed, and I finally let one tear slide down my cheek, silent, hot, and quick. They thought they'd built a perfect lie, but someone else had already seen through the cracks. I just didn't know yet how wide those cracks would open. You can always tell when someone's pretending to care. There's a certain rhythm to fake concern. The footsteps stop too close to your bed. The smile shows too many teeth. That's how the detective's visit began. It was mid-morning. The hospital hallway smelled of antiseptic and bad coffee. I was sitting upright for the first time, staring at the TV that no one ever really watches. Maurice and Kendra stood near the window, talking softly, their voices syrupy, when staff walked by. Then a knock, 2 short taps, broke the routine. A man in plain clothes stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, eyes alert but polite. "Detective Rowe," he said, flashing his badge for only a second, just enough to make it real. "Mind if I ask a few questions?" Kendra put on her practice smile. "Of course, officer. We were just talking about how lucky Mom was. She tripped in her office, right, honey?" I kept my face neutral. That's what they said. Rowe's gaze flicked from me to the bandage peeking under my hospital gown. "Sharp fall. Then—" "Very," Kendra answered before I could. "She must have hit a letter opener or something." Rowe scribbled something in his notebook but didn't look down at it. His attention stayed on Maurice. "And you were home when this happened?" Maurice cleared his throat. "I was asleep. Heard a noise. Found her on the floor." The detective's tone stayed mild, but I noticed he didn't write that down either. "You call 911? "Yes," Kendra said quickly, right after we realized she was bleeding. Rowe nodded, still watching them. "Timing on the call matches that." Maurice smiled like a man who'd practiced in a mirror. "I'm sure it does." Rowe looked back at me. "You remember any of it, ma'am?" I met his eyes. Something about him felt steady, like he wasn't here to play along. Bits and pieces. "I got dizzy, I think." Kendra squeezed my hand too tightly. "She's still groggy." He caught that gesture. His brow lifted a little, not in judgment, but in quiet curiosity. Then he pulled a business card from his pocket and set it on my bedside table. "If you remember anything different," he said gently, "call me. Even a small detail can help make paperwork match truth." Before he turned to go, the nurse, Jameson, stepped in with a chart. "Detective, could I have a word outside?" Kendra stiffened. "Is that necessary?" Jameson smiled sweetly. "Just routine follow-up." The door closed behind them. I could only see shapes through the frosted glass. Her head bent, his taller frame, nodding slowly. When he came back, his tone was lighter, almost friendly. "Hope you heal fast, Mrs. Mercer," he said. "Try to rest." He left without looking back at Kendra or Maurice. As soon as the door shut, Kendra exhaled hard. Why would she pull him aside like that? Maurice shrugged, trying for calm. "She's just doing her job." But her hands were trembling when she reached for her phone. When Jameson returned, she moved around the room quietly, checking my pulse, adjusting the drip. "Everything okay?" I asked under my breath. She didn't answer directly, just whispered, "You're not alone in this," and slipped out again. Later, when the hallway emptied and the lights dimmed to evening mode, I saw her down the corridor typing at the nurse's station, face half lit by the screen glow. I didn't know then what she was sending, but I guessed. Detective Rowe would read her email before the night was over, 3 sentences long, clear as glass. "Patient's wound not consistent with a fall. Depth and angle indicate deliberate puncture. Recommend further investigation." Inside my room, I closed my eyes and pretended to sleep, but my heart had already started a new rhythm, steady, cautious, and waiting for whatever came next. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after betrayal, like standing in the eye of a storm. You know destruction's still spinning around you, but for a moment, it's quiet enough to breathe. That's what the next morning felt like. I'd been discharged from the hospital sooner than I wanted. Maurice said it was better to recover at home, but I knew what that meant. Keep me close, keep me quiet. Kendra played the doting nurse, bringing tea I didn't drink and medicine I didn't trust. Every smile from her came with a shadow. By the second day, the house felt colder. My shoulder ached, but the silence hurt worse. I sat in my armchair pretending to nap, listening to their whispers in the kitchen. The only time I felt safe was when they left for errands. That's when I finally dared to call Mrs. Trellis. She lived 2 houses down, widowed, sharp, and curious by nature. She'd been the one who baked casseroles for the whole street when Maurice and Kendra first moved in. "Kate," she whispered the moment she answered, "I've been meaning to ask, are you all right? I saw an ambulance that night." I swallowed. "Did your camera pick up anything?" Your motion light came on. There was a pause. Then she said carefully, "Come over. You should see it yourself." It took everything in me to dress and walk that short distance. My arm throbbed, but adrenaline carried me. When she opened the door, she looked at my bandage and shook her head. I knew something wasn't right. We sat at her kitchen table while she opened her laptop. The footage played in grayscale, Quiet Street, the timestamp glowing 2:59 a.m. Then, a shadow moved fast across her driveway. Kendra, her robe tied, hair loose, no bag, no purse, just her walking toward my porch. The camera switched angles as she came back 6 minutes later, clutching something shiny in her hand. Mrs. Trellis didn't speak. Neither did I. The only sound was the faint ticking of her wall clock. "I need to send this to someone," I said, finally. "Detective Rowe," she replied without hesitation. She still had his card. He'd stopped by earlier asking if anyone noticed lights on that night. She forwarded the clip to me first, then to his email. I typed a short message with shaking fingers. "You were right to doubt them. This is what you missed." I felt lighter pressing send, but that feeling lasted only minutes. Through her window, I saw Morris's car roll slowly past, like a predator circling its prey. Back home, I sat at my desk, the same spot where the bloodstains still lingered under the rug, and called Rowe. He picked up on the first ring. "Mrs. Mercer?" His voice sounded more awake than mine. "I just got your email." "I have more," I said quickly. "There's a gold pen missing from my desk. It was the weapon." He was silent for a moment. "The pen's important. I'll need access to the house." "Kendra and Maurice are here most of the time," I said, "but tomorrow they're out for a mortgage meeting." "I'll make it quick," he said, "and quiet." The next afternoon, Rowe arrived in plain clothes, pretending to deliver mail. He slipped inside while Mrs. Trellis kept watch from her porch. He moved through the study like someone who already knew the house. Within minutes, he crouched near the bookshelf, gloved hands lifting the small gold pen from behind a row of photo frames. It looked innocent in his hand, smooth, elegant, polished, but under the cap, a faint smear of brown told the truth. "I'll have forensics run it," he said, slipping it into a clear evidence bag. "If we're lucky, there's residue or prints." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. "You really think they'll find something?" He gave me a half smile. Truth leaves fingerprints too, Mrs. Mercer. It just takes time to see them. That night, after he left, I sat in the same room where it all happened. For the first time, I wasn't staring at the blood on the floor. I was staring at the empty space on my desk where that pen used to sit. The air felt different now, less heavy. The storm hadn't passed, not yet, but for the first time, there was a crack in the clouds. You can feel when justice starts to breathe. It doesn't rush, it builds, like a storm that begins with still air before the wind shifts. Detective Rowe called 3 days after leaving with the pen. I was in the kitchen, trying to convince myself I still lived in that house, and not in a memory of it. Mrs. Mercer, he said, forensics just came back. The residue on that pen, human blood, DNA matches yours. We also lifted partial prints belonging to your daughter-in-law. For a second, I couldn't speak. I just stared at the wall clock above the stove, the same one Maurice installed last Christmas, and thought, finally, something's talking that they can't silence. By noon, Rowe was at my door with another man, a young assistant district attorney named Lopez. They sat at my table, spreading folders, cables, and a laptop between the salt shaker and the teapot. The footage from Mrs. Trellis's camera played again. Kendra entering at 3 a.m., leaving 6 minutes later. The screen froze on her face as she glanced toward my window. Lopez tapped the file, open beside it. We have the SOS ping at 3:01 a.m. and your hospital intake at 3:36 a.m. The timeline's airtight. We're moving forward with charges, aggravated assault, and attempted fraud. Kendra was arrested that evening. The photo they took of her, the mugshot, looked almost elegant, chin lifted, hair brushed back, a faint smirk like she was posing for a magazine spread. The local news used it on their 10 p.m. report, suburban couple under investigation for elder abuse. Maurice posted her bail before sunrise. He didn't come inside after the hearing. He just sat in his car outside my gate, engine idling, headlights washing over the porch. Then his text came. You could have handled this privately, Mom. I didn't reply. Some things deserve silence. The next morning, Rowe called again. We'll need you to have legal counsel, ma'am. This is going to trial. I sighed. I haven't spoken to a lawyer since my husband died. Then find the one who handled your husband's estate. He said, if you trusted him once, trust him again. That's how Isaiah Bell came back into my life. He arrived that afternoon wearing the same beige coat he'd worn to my husband's funeral 10 years ago. Older, grayer, calmer. When he hugged me, his voice was low and even. Kate, when they buried your husband, they didn't bury your fight. We sat in the sunroom going over paperwork while Kendra and Morris's names glared from every document. Isaiah's hands were steady on the pages. The DA's case is solid, but they'll try to paint you as confused. Let them underestimate you. It's our best weapon. Outside, news vans were parked halfway down the street. Neighbors peeked through blinds. The quiet life I'd built was suddenly public property. When Isaiah left that evening, he paused at the door. This will get uglier before it gets better, he said. Are you sure you're ready? I looked at the bandage still covering my shoulder. I'd been ready since the moment she stabbed me. That night, as the house sank into darkness, I noticed the gold pen's absence on my desk again. Its empty place a reminder that truth had finally found a trail to follow. And somewhere downtown, Kendra's smile from that mugshot stared back at the world, proof that even guilt can look graceful, until justice decides it's time to move. The weeks before the hearing felt like being trapped in a slow storm. The air was calm, but you could hear destruction gathering. Kendra's lawyers started appearing on television. Her smile was calm, her tone soft, her words sharp enough to cut. "This case," she said, "is about a confused elderly woman who doesn't remember what really happened. We intend to prove her confusion, not her guilt." The morning after that interview, my phone buzzed nonstop. People I didn't know were tagging my name online, resharing headlines that twisted every part of the story. They called me unstable, bitter, confused. Some even said I was doing it for money. I read the comments once, then shut everything off. When Isaiah arrived later that day, he already knew. "They're trying to turn the noise into truth," he said. "Let them talk. The courtroom listens to evidence, not gossip." He opened his briefcase and spread out a stack of papers on the table. Bank statements, account logs, transaction records. He'd spent the morning comparing every signature that carried my name. "I wanted to see what they touched," he said, "and I found it." He slid one document toward me, a transfer slip dated March 6th, 3 days after the attack. $25,000 moved from my savings to a new account, then another and another, each signed K. Mercer in handwriting that looked exactly like mine. Too exact. I felt heat rise through my chest. "They did this while I was in the hospital." He nodded. "Every one of these transfers happened between 9 a.m. and noon on those days. You were under medical supervision the whole time. We'll verify that through the hospital log." Isaiah highlighted each line with quiet precision. He wasn't angry or loud. He was deliberate, the way you imagine surgeons before the first incision. "This proves forgery," he said, "and it changes the tone of the case completely. They weren't just hiding a crime, they were stealing behind it." Outside, cameras had begun appearing near the driveway. Reporters waited in cars, hoping for a glimpse of the woman Kendra's team called delusional. I watched them from the window while Isaiah made notes. "She's been feeding them," I said. "She's feeding herself," he replied. "People who lie this loud are trying to drown something out." That night, I heard my name on the television again. Kendra's attorney spoke, confidently, claiming I had been financially dependent on my son for years. She smiled as she said it, turning her lie into something graceful. I muted the TV and sat in the dark. By morning, Isaiah had more. He brought a printed screenshot of a login record from my online banking. It showed Kendra's email address under authorized access. She hadn't even bothered to hide her trail. "We're submitting this to the DA," he said. "It's clean, verifiable, and time-stamped." Once the state includes these records, her credibility disappears. I didn't say anything for a long time. The sunlight came through the blinds, falling across the papers scattered on my table. The numbers, dates, and signatures felt colder than anything I'd seen in my life. When he stood to leave, Isaiah looked around the house. "You've done everything right, Kate," he said. "Now we let the truth do its work." After he left, I poured myself a glass of water and sat quietly. The neighborhood was still. Every sound outside, the wind, the distant traffic, felt like a reminder that the world was still moving, even if mine had slowed down. I looked again at the papers Isaiah left behind. There it was, proof of everything they'd denied. Lines they thought were invisible were now carved into evidence. For the first time, the weight on my chest loosened. The lies were loud, but the truth was finally getting its turn to speak. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and nerves. Every seat was filled before the clerk even called the case. A row of cameras lined the back wall, red lights blinking like small hearts waiting to break. Reporters whispered behind their notepads. Someone had turned my pain into a trending hashtag. Hashtag the Mercer trial. I sat beside Isaiah, hands clasped in my lap, a soft band of light cutting across the defense table. Kendra was 2 seats away, her hair perfectly styled, her lipstick the exact color of confidence. She didn't look at me. Maurice sat behind her, shoulders squared but hollow, like a man trying to hold a story together. The bailiff's voice filled the room. All rise. Judge Hollis entered, gray suit, steady stride, the kind of face that didn't flinch easily. When he sat, the noise fell away. Only the sound of papers shifting and the soft hum of the ceiling fan remained. The prosecutor, a tall woman named Grace Kent, rose first. She walked to the center with slow, measured steps, her voice even but heavy. This case, she said, is not about family disagreements. It is about blood, not bitterness. The words landed like a drumbeat. She paused, letting the silence hold. At 3:00 in the morning, inside the victim's own home, the defendant used a gold pen gifted by the very woman she called Mom to stab her in the shoulder. She then attempted to disguise the wound as an accident. Evidence will show deliberate intent, financial forgery, and a calculated effort to erase accountability. Someone in the audience coughed. Cameras clicked. Grace stepped closer to the jury box. You will hear arguments about confusion and age. You'll be told Mrs. Mercer imagined things. But I ask you to look at one piece of evidence that never lies, the clock. 3:01 a.m., an SOS signal sent from her phone. 3:04 a.m., the defendant caught on video leaving the scene. 3:36 a.m., emergency admission at the hospital. Time is truth, and time will tell this story better than words ever could. She returned to her table, leaving a stillness so sharp it almost hummed. Then came Kendra's lawyer, Melissa Crane, a woman who smiled as though every word she spoke came pre-approved by the Mirror. She stood, smoothed her jacket, and began softly, almost tenderly. This case, she said, is about a misunderstanding. A woman's fall. Nothing more, nothing less. Her tone was gentle, almost pitying. Our client, Mrs. Kendra Mercer, did what any caring daughter-in-law would do. She stayed up late, worried for her mother-in-law's health. When Mrs. Mercer fell, she panicked, and like many people under pressure, made mistakes in how she explained it. That is not a crime. That is fear. She turned toward the jury. We will show you that there was no struggle, no weapon, only a pen that Mrs. Mercer herself misplaced. You will see medical reports suggesting confusion, and you will understand that sometimes memory is fragile. This isn't cruelty. It's tragedy. Her voice softened further. Mrs. Mercer raised a son who loves her deeply. That love may have faltered, but it was never replaced by violence. The prosecution will tell you this is about greed. It isn't. It's about a family trying and failing to hold together what's left of itself. She nodded gently, then returned to her seat. The courtroom stayed silent for several seconds. Cameras pointed at me, waiting for a reaction. I didn't move. Isaiah leaned toward me. They're painting you small, he whispered. Stay still. The truth looks bigger when it's quiet. Outside the courtroom, a television crew streamed live updates. The words, "elderly victim faces family" in court scrolled across screens. Hashtags multiplied by the minute. My face, pale under fluorescent lights, filled phone screens across the county. I sat there, back straight, shoulder aching beneath my jacket, watching Kendra adjust her earrings like she was preparing for a magazine shoot. Judge Hollis cleared his throat. "Opening statements are complete," he said. "We proceed tomorrow at 9. The gavel struck once. The sound was sharp, final, and deep enough to echo through my chest. I stood slowly, steady on my feet. Every camera followed me as I walked out with Isaiah. For the first time since that night, I didn't feel like the story being told. I felt like the truth waiting to speak. The courtroom felt colder that morning. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe it was the tension that came with hearing the word science after weeks of gossip and lies. Every seat was filled again. Reporters in the back, jurors ready, the hum of cameras running like a quiet engine of curiosity. Judge Hollis adjusted his glasses. "Prosecution, you may call your next witness." Grace Kent stood. "The state calls Dr. Franklin Moore." He was the same ER doctor who treated me the night of the attack. The sight of him brought back the sting of antiseptic and the smell of blood on gauze. He walked to the stand, his white coat folded neatly over one arm, calm but alert. "Dr. Moore," Grace began, "please describe what you observed when Mrs. Mercer was brought into the ER." He straightened in the chair. A single puncture wound to the left shoulder, approximately 2 inches deep, downward angle, clean entry, consistent with deliberate force. The patient was alert but losing blood rapidly. The wound did not align with a fall or accident. Grace nodded slowly. "So, in your medical opinion, this was not self-inflicted or accidental?" He looked straight at the jury. "No, ma'am. The direction and precision were deliberate. The pressure required was controlled. That wound was caused by another person." The defense attorney shifted in her seat. The jurors' faces tightened. A woman in the front row crossed her arms. One man leaned forward, elbows on his knees, focused on every word. Grace continued. "Did anyone interfere with your ability to contact authorities that night?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "The younger woman who arrived with the patient insisted she'd fallen and asked us not to involve police. She refused to provide her own ID. When I asked, that woman," Grace said, "was the defendant Kendra Mercer?" He confirmed it. The sound of pens scribbling echoed through the room. Then came the nurse, Ruth Jameson, steady and soft-spoken, still in her uniform. She didn't look at me as she walked in. She looked at the jury, like she wanted them to see the truth through her eyes. "Ms. Jameson," Grace said, "you were the attending nurse?" "Yes. I received Mrs. Mercer's intake form that night." "Did you have concerns about what you were told?" She nodded once. "The story didn't match the wound. I logged my observations in the chart. I also contacted the police after the patient was transferred out of the ER." The defense tried to chip at her credibility. "You made that judgment on site without investigation?" She kept her voice calm. "I made that judgment on experience. 20 years in emergency medicine. You know, when a wound tells a different story than the person speaking." The courtroom went quiet for a full second. You could almost hear people breathing again. From the corner of my eye, I noticed a juror near the back, a man in his 40s, sitting stiffly. His eyes were red. When the nurse described how Kendra blocked the police, he blinked hard and looked down. Later, Isaiah whispered that his mother had been hurt by a caretaker years ago. He didn't need convincing. He already knew the pattern. Grace finished the round with one last question for the nurse. If police had been called immediately, could evidence have been compromised? Jameson's answer came steady. Yes, valuable evidence might have been destroyed or altered. That's why I made the report myself. When she stepped down, the jurors tracked her walk back to the bench. Even the reporters had stopped typing. Grace turned toward the judge. Your Honor, the prosecution rests for today. Judge Hollis nodded. Court adjourned until tomorrow at 9. The gavel dropped, but no one moved right away. I stood, slow and steady, feeling every eye in that room on me. No one needed words anymore. The science had spoken clean and precise, just like the wound itself. The courtroom was fuller than usual that morning. Word had spread that new evidence was coming, and people wanted to see it happen live. You could feel the electricity in the air, curiosity mixed with judgment, all packed into one tense room. Reporters lined the back row. The local news station had turned the trial into a midday broadcast, calling it the case that split a family. Isaiah sat beside me, calm as stone, flipping through his notes. Across the room, Kendra whispered to her lawyer, her face polished and bright for the cameras. Maurice sat behind her, jaw tight, arms crossed like a wall between them, and the truth that was closing in. When Judge Hollis entered, the crowd rose, then settled into silence. Grace Kent stood first, voice firm but measured. The state calls Mrs. Mildred Trellis to the stand. Mrs. Trellis, my neighbor, my friend, walked up carefully, her hands clasped tight around her small handbag. Her presence alone softened something in me. She'd always been the quiet strength of our street, the one who baked for funerals and watched over widows. Grace began gently. Mrs. Trellis, you live 2 houses away from the plaintiff. Yes, ma'am. On the night of March 4th, around 3 in the morning, did your outdoor camera record activity? It did. She glanced briefly at me, then at the jury. I didn't realize what I'd captured until later. Grace nodded. Your Honor, the state moves to introduce Exhibit 14, the original security footage from the witness's camera. The judge approved. A technician rolled in a monitor and dimmed the lights. The room shifted into darkness, except for the glow of the screen. The timestamp appeared first, 2:59 and 47 seconds a.m. The sound of faint wind played from the tiny speaker. Then, a figure moved across the sidewalk. Robe, slippers, long hair catching the light. Kendra. She walked fast, no hesitation. Her head turned toward my porch as she reached my door. Grace spoke softly, letting the jury absorb it. Mrs. Trellis, can you confirm this is your footage? Yes. The video continued. At 3 hours, 6 minutes, and 10 seconds, the same figure reappeared, moving quickly back the way she came. Her hand clutched something small and reflective. When the lights came back on, no one spoke. The silence felt heavier than any word that could follow. Grace broke it first. Mrs. Trellis, was anyone else visible entering or leaving that property during the footage? No, ma'am. Just her. Kendra's lawyer tried to recover the room. Isn't it possible she was checking on Mrs. Mercer's safety after hearing a noise? Mrs. Trellis turned toward her. People don't check on someone's safety at 3 in the morning with something in their hand. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Even the bailiff shifted his stance. Grace nodded, thanking her, and turned back to the judge. The state rests this portion of its evidence. While the courtroom rearranged itself, I glanced toward Kendra. Her shoulders had stiffened, but her expression didn't match her hands. They were shaking slightly against the edge of the table. Maurice looked straight ahead, jaw locked tight enough to show the muscle pulsing under his skin. Behind them, a reporter typed furiously, the blue light from his phone illuminating his face. Seconds later, his tweet hit the internet. Courtroom silent. Everyone watching that 6-minute clip. The Mercer trial just turned. Isaiah leaned closer and whispered, "That's the kind of silence you don't recover from." Judge Hollis cleared his throat, signaling for the next witness. The noise of papers and movement started again, but it couldn't erase what had just happened. The footage was still playing in everyone's mind, the robe, the movement, the proof. As the session recessed, Kendra stood slowly, her mask of calm starting to crack. Her lawyer whispered something that didn't land. She brushed him off, head lowered, eyes darting toward the gallery like she was searching for an escape that wasn't there. I didn't look away this time. I met her eyes and held them until she turned first. The video had done what words never could. It made the truth visible. And for the first time since that night, the silence in that courtroom belonged to me. The air in the courtroom felt different that morning. Heavy, humid, too full to breathe. Even before the bailiff spoke, I could feel what was coming. It wasn't the sound of the gavel that made the room tense. It was the silence that waited for it. When Judge Hollis called the session to order, no one shifted in their seat. Grace Kent stood and said clearly, "The state calls Maurice Mercer." My son rose from the bench behind Kendra and walked to the stand. He looked tired, older than his 38 years, but his suit was pressed sharp enough to slice through guilt. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The clerk swore him in. He placed his hand on the Bible without hesitation, like a man confident in his own story. Grace began. "Mr. Mercer, on the morning of March 4th, you claim your mother fell in her study?" "Yes," he said, voice low but steady. "That's correct. I woke up to a noise and found her on the floor. There was blood. I panicked." Grace's expression didn't change. "So you maintain this was an accident?" "Yes. She must have tripped." "Was your wife in the house that night?" He hesitated. "She was upstairs with me." Grace nodded slowly, then walked toward the evidence table. She picked up a sheet of paper and handed it to him. "Mr. Mercer, this is a forensic report from your phone records. Would you please read the highlighted text aloud?" He glanced down. His Adam's apple shifted once before he spoke. It says, "She found the forms. Sent at 2:58 a.m. And who did you send that message to?" He cleared his throat. "My wife." "What forms were you referring to?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The sound of the ceiling fan filled the pause. Grace pressed gently. "Were those the estate transfer papers your mother never authorized?" His voice came quieter. "I don't know what you're talking about." Grace stepped closer. "Let me remind you, Mr. Mercer, that your wife was seen entering your mother's home at 3 a.m., 2 minutes after you sent that text. Do you still want to claim coincidence?" He looked up, finally meeting her gaze. The courtroom watched every muscle in his face shift, searching for a lie that could hold its weight. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Isaiah rose from our table. "Your Honor, permission to show Exhibit 17." The judge nodded. The monitor flickered on again. The image of that same text message filled the screen, time-stamped 2:58 and 7 seconds a.m. The next image was Kendra walking across the neighbor's driveway at 3 o'clock. 2 minutes that said more than any speech ever could. Grace turned back to him. Mr. Mercer, you said you panicked after finding your mother on the floor. But 2 minutes before your wife entered that house, you already knew she had found the forms. What were you planning to do? Morris's jaw tightened. I was trying to protect my family. From what? From her, he said suddenly, pointing toward me. She never trusted anyone. She kept everything in her name. She made it impossible for us to move forward. The words landed like blows, but not the kind that drew blood. The room stayed still. Grace didn't interrupt. Maurice looked around, voice cracking now. She doesn't understand how hard it's been. I was trying to help. By letting your wife stab her. Grace's tone stayed calm, surgical. He dropped his head into his hands. No answer, just silence. Judge Hollis cleared his throat. Mr. Mercer, you will answer the question. He lifted his head, eyes red. I didn't tell her to hurt her. I just wanted the papers back. That sentence hung in the air, half confession, half excuse. Isaiah leaned toward me and whispered, That's the unraveling. I didn't look at him. My eyes were fixed on my son, the boy I'd raised on bedtime stories and piano lessons, now sitting under oath, breaking piece by piece. Tears slipped down my cheeks, slow and silent. They weren't for pain anymore. They were for recognition, for the truth finally showing its face, even if it came wearing his. When the judge called a recess, no one moved. Maurice sat frozen on the stand, eyes lowered, the weight of his own words pressing him down. For the first time, I saw what betrayal looked like when it ran out of places to hide. The morning started with a chill that crept through the marble floor of the courthouse. Everyone seemed to feel it. Even Kendra, who usually entered like a celebrity on trial, walked slower, her smile stretched too tight. Something was coming, and Isaiah had said almost nothing all morning. Only stay calm, Kate. Just breathe when it happens. Judge Hollis took his seat. The bailiff's voice echoed. Court is now in session. The rustle of suits and papers filled the air. Then silence. Isaiah rose from his chair with that same quiet power that made people lean forward. Your Honor, he said, with the court's permission, the prosecution would like to present newly authenticated financial evidence. Kendra's lawyer frowned. Objection. We weren't notified of any new submissions. Isaiah didn't flinch. This was disclosed to the DA less than 48 hours ago after a bank's compliance team finalized their findings. It's directly tied to the motive in this case. The judge nodded once. Proceed. Isaiah walked to the center of the courtroom, a folder in his hand. This, he began, is a summary of an investment account opened under the name Catherine Mercer Family Trust, created 6 months after the death of Mr. Leonard Mercer, the plaintiff's husband. The account holds a balance of $614,229. The signature authorizing the transfer is Mrs. Mercer's, except it isn't. He clicked a remote. The courtroom lights dimmed. On the large screen behind him, a scanned signature appeared. Mine, perfect loops, the same stroke, and tilt. Then another image replaced it. My actual signature from the estate documents Isaiah had handled years ago. The differences were subtle, but the slant was wrong, the spacing too wide. Isaiah's voice stayed calm. This signature was forged. The bank's security footage from the date of transfer shows who made the deposit. The screen changed again. A pause. Then the grainy black and white image flickered into view. The courtroom seemed to exhale all at once. There was Maurice standing at the bank counter, wearing his navy work jacket, his face clear under the fluorescent light. He signed a form, looked over his shoulder once, and smiled. The silence that followed felt like gravity itself. Maurice didn't move. His eyes locked on the screen, hands tightening on the rail in front of him. Kendra turned slowly toward him, whispering something through her teeth. He didn't answer. Isaiah let the footage play 10 seconds longer, then froze the frame. This transaction moved funds from Mr. Mercer's life insurance payout, intended for his wife, into an account controlled jointly by Maurice Mercer and Kendra Mercer. These are the same funds that were withdrawn in portions leading up to the night of March 4th. A collective murmur rippled across the gallery. The judge's pen stopped mid-note. Kendra's attorney leaned close to her client and whispered harshly, "We weren't told about this." Kendra whispered back, but her voice was too sharp, too broken to be a whisper anymore. "He said it was handled." Isaiah turned toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not speculation. This is theft, premeditation, and motive documented by both a bank and the defendant's own actions." He clicked the screen off, plunging the courtroom back into the heavy quiet. "Your Honor, the prosecution rests its submission for the day." Judge Hollis took off his glasses, pressing his fingertips to the bridge of his nose. "This court will recess for 20 minutes. The gavel struck once, but nobody moved. The reporters in the back didn't type. The jurors didn't blink. The entire room stayed frozen in that moment, everyone processing the same image, Morris's face on that screen. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just sat there, watching the man I raised finally come into focus under the same light that had hidden him for years. No one had recovered from what they'd just seen. The footage of Maurice at the bank still burned in everyone's eyes, like the ghost of truth that refused to fade. When court resumed, the air felt heavier, so heavy it seemed like even the walls were listening. Kendra sat stiff beside her attorney, her face pale and motionless. Maurice leaned forward on the defense table, staring at nothing. They didn't look like a couple anymore, just two people waiting for separate storms to hit. Judge Hollis re-entered, slow and steady. He adjusted his glasses, then nodded for Grace Kent to continue. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, we ask the defense if they wish to respond to the financial findings presented before recess. Melissa Crane, Kendra's attorney, rose. Her tone had lost the silkiness it carried all week. The defense requests a brief delay to verify the authenticity of the footage and documents, but before she could finish, Kendra's voice sliced through the room. Don't bother. Every head turned. She stood up fast, knocking her chair into the wall behind her. He said she'd never find out. Her voice cracked mid-sentence. He promised me it was done, that it was just paperwork. Her lawyer tried to pull her down. Kendra, sit. But she pushed her hand away. No, you told me to stay quiet, to smile, to act like this was nothing. You told me to call it an accident. Her breathing turned ragged, words tumbling faster than sense could follow. Maurice turned sharply. Kendra, stop talking. She whirled toward him. Stop talking? You stabbed your own mother's life apart. You told me to take those forms. His fist hit the table. "You stabbed her." The sound echoed across the courtroom like a shot. Gasps broke everywhere. Reporters, jurors, people in the gallery. One woman covered her mouth. Another dropped her pen. Kendra froze, realizing what she'd said, or what he'd just admitted for both of them. Her knees buckled, and she sank back into her chair, hands shaking. Morris's face flushed red, then drained to gray. Judge Hollis's gavel struck once. Order! Order in this court. But no one could move fast enough to catch the moment that followed. Kendra broke completely, sobbing, rocking back and forth. He said she'd never find out. He said it would all go away. Security rushed forward, 2 officers holding her shoulders as she trembled uncontrollably. Maurice stood like he wanted to run, but there was nowhere left to go. He sank back into his seat, head in his hands, breathing hard. The sound faded until only Kendra's muffled cries filled the room. Even the reporters had stopped typing. Cameras sat motionless. The air itself had gone still. Judge Hollis lowered his gavel, but didn't strike it again. He removed his glasses slowly, pressing the bridge of his nose. His expression, part disbelief, part sorrow, said what no verdict yet could. That silence, it wasn't empty. It was the kind that fills every corner when truth finally lands, loud without sound, heavy without motion. The kind of silence that rewrites everything. I sat completely still. My body wouldn't move even if I wanted it to. My tears fell without force, sliding down my face one after the other. But they weren't from pain anymore. They were from release. After weeks of accusation, of strangers debating my sanity and worth, I didn't have to say another word. The people who had buried me with lies were now uncovering themselves, inch by inch, right in front of the world. Judge Hollis finally looked toward me. Our eyes met for a brief moment. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His face carried the entire weight of what the title would later write itself into, The Silence of Justice Catching Up. When the bailiff cleared the courtroom, no one moved until the judge left. It wasn't respect that kept them still. It was shock, the kind that only comes when you've witnessed the truth undo its own disguise. I stood slowly, my knees trembling but firm enough to walk out without help. The flash of cameras came next, but they didn't matter. For the first time since that night, I didn't feel like a victim sitting in a courtroom. I felt like a woman finally seen, an old wood when we returned the next morning. Reporters crowded the steps, umbrellas knocking together. Microphones waiting for a word no one had the strength to give. Inside, the air felt lighter and heavier at once, like something was finally about to end. Judge Hollis took his seat. He didn't look at anyone in particular. He just nodded to the clerk. "Bring in the jury." They filed in one by one, faces unreadable. 12 people who had spent 2 weeks living with the evidence of my life. Every step they took sounded louder than it should have. Even the cameras in the back stopped blinking red. Kendra sat still, pale and drained. Her eyes were swollen, her lipstick gone. Maurice looked smaller too, his shoulders slumped, suit wrinkled. The 2 of them didn't look at each other. There was nothing left to say. When the foreman stood, you could hear the rain against the tall windows. Judge Hollis's voice was low but clear. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." The courtroom held its breath. On the charge of aggravated assault, the foreman read, "We find the defendant, Kendra Mercer, guilty." The sound that followed wasn't noise. It was release. A sharp inhale from the gallery, a faint gasp from someone near the aisle, the creak of an old bench under shifting weight. On the charge of forgery, the foreman continued, "Guilty." Morris's hands clenched on the table, white at the knuckles. And on the charge of financial exploitation of an elder, the man said, his voice steady now, "Guilty." The words landed like stones dropped into water, clean, final, impossible to take back. Judge Hollis leaned back, silent for a moment. His pen rested against the wood of the bench. The court waited for his voice, but even he seemed to need a breath before finding it. He looked at Kendra first. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "you used trust as your weapon. You took a woman's generosity and tried to twist it into dependence." His tone wavered just slightly, the kind of shake that comes when emotion pushes against authority. "You tried to bury her with ink and paper. Instead, you buried yourselves." No one spoke. He turned to Maurice. "And you, Mr. Mercer, your silence was participation. Your choice to stand still while wrong was done made you no less guilty than the one who acted." Kendra sobbed openly now, shoulders shaking. Maurice stared down, his jaw working, eyes glassy but dry. The gavel struck once. "This court sentences Kendra Mercer to 15 years in state custody, with eligibility for parole after 10. Maurice Mercer, 2 years for accessory and financial fraud, and full restitution of funds taken." The courtroom remained still. Only the sound of rain outside filled the spaces between his words. When the deputies stepped forward, Kendra reached for Morris's arm, but he didn't move. Her hand fell away as they led her out, cuffs catching the light. Maurice followed, head lowered, surrounded by silence too deep to break. Judge Hollis stood, gathered his papers, and left through the side door without another word. He didn't need one. His face carried everything. Outside, the reporters swarmed, voices echoing across the courthouse steps. Someone shouted a headline into a microphone, the case that silenced a court. The phrase spread like fire before I even reached the exit. I stopped at the top of the stairs, the gray sky opening over the crowd. Flashes went off, rain soaking through my coat, but it didn't matter. The words had already been said, the truth already carved. When I finally spoke to the waiting microphones, my voice was steady. "It's done," I said simply. "The truth doesn't shout. It stands." Then I walked down the steps and didn't look back. The first morning back in my own house felt strange. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm. The air smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish, like the home I'd loved before all this began. The study had been cleaned, the walls repaired, and the desk restored to the way it was before that night. But even with everything back in place, the room felt different, lighter. The county clerk had sent notice 2 weeks earlier. All assets reinstated, all accounts cleared. Isaiah had handled the paperwork himself, making sure my name was the only one that mattered again. When I went to the bank, the teller, someone new, young, nervous, had smiled and said quietly, "Ma'am, everyone here knows what you've been through. You did good." The first letter arrived the day after the verdict. Then another and another. Piles of envelopes began filling my kitchen table, handwritten notes from people I'd never met. A retired teacher from Florida wrote, "You stood for all of us who stayed quiet too long." A young man from Oregon said his grandmother had watched the trial and decided to press charges against her caregiver. There were hundreds like that. Stories of fear turned into action. Some came from people who just wanted to say they believed me when the world didn't. I read every one, carefully, sometimes twice. Then I placed them in a small wooden box by the window. I didn't call it memorabilia. I called it proof of healing. Outside, the news vans were gone. The cameras had moved on to other stories. But the quiet they left behind wasn't empty. It was mine. Kendra had begun serving her sentence at the women's facility near Greenville. I didn't check the news updates, but sometimes I heard her name mentioned in small reports about the case that had changed public perception of elder exploitation. Maurice, still out on bond for the initial charges, now faced new ones, additional fraud counts discovered through Isaiah's follow-up audit. The same greed that had destroyed their lives kept giving itself away, piece by piece. Isaiah stopped by occasionally to bring documents for me to sign. He never stayed long, just long enough to check in, drink tea, and leave with that calm smile of his. He never talked about the case anymore. He didn't need to, but it was Detective Rowe who surprised me most. He showed up one Friday morning, hat in hand, his face softer than I remembered. He wasn't alone. An older woman walked beside him, his mother. She carried a small bouquet of lavender and a smile that trembled at the edges. Mrs. Mercer, Rose said gently, I wanted to introduce you to someone. His mother stepped forward, offering the flowers. My son told me everything you went through, she said. I wanted to thank you for reminding him what it means to keep faith in people. Roe looked at her, then at me. We've had our differences, my mother and I. I used to think keeping distance protected her, but watching your case changed that. You made me realize that protection isn't silence, it's presence. He smiled faintly. She's moving in with me next week. I figured it's about time I start doing for her what you fought to make people remember. How to show up. I didn't have words for that. I just nodded, feeling the quiet warmth rise through my chest. Sometimes victories aren't loud. They arrive in gestures like this. Small, human, lasting. After they left, I sat on the porch watching the evening light spread across the yard. The world looked ordinary again. Birds, breeze, a soft hum from passing cars. But nothing was truly the same. The house was safe. My name was mine again. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like someone recovering from pain. I felt like someone living again. When the sun began to fade, I closed my eyes and whispered, "We made it, Leonard." Then I went inside, turned off the porch light, and let the stillness settle like a prayer. It had been 6 months since the verdict, but the clock in my bedroom still glowed the same familiar hour, 3 a.m., the same time everything had once shattered. Yet tonight, there was no sound of papers rustling, no footsteps creeping down the hallway, no fear pressing at my chest. Just silence. Clean, ordinary silence. I sat up slowly, the kind of waking that doesn't come from restlessness, but remembrance. The house was calm, washed in the soft blue of night. The study light down the hall was still on. I'd fallen asleep writing again. My desk was scattered with letters from people who'd written since the trial, strangers who now felt like quiet friends. Each envelope held a different kind of healing, a reminder that what happened wasn't just mine anymore. I slipped on my robe and walked to the study. The same desk, the same wood, but no shadows this time, just peace. The gold pen Isaiah had given me sat near the lamp, glinting faintly under the light. He'd said, "A new story deserves a new pen." I hadn't used it yet. Until now. I sat down, pulled a blank sheet of paper from the drawer, and took a slow breath. The nib touched the page with an ease that felt sacred. Your Honor, you once said justice doesn't always speak through words. I understood that long before your verdict. That day, when you looked at them, you didn't need a speech. Your face spoke for every mother who's ever been silenced and every woman who's ever been doubted. You made the truth visible without raising your voice. For that, I thank you. Mercer, resilient. I paused, reading it once more. No corrections, no rewrites. It was perfect because it was simple, the way peace often is after a long storm. I folded the letter and slid it into an envelope. The pen stayed in my hand a second longer than it needed to. My reflection in the window met my eyes, steadier, older, but unbroken. As I stood, the wind shifted the curtains. A faint glow crept through, a soft, early light that blurred the edge of the night. I looked at the clock again, 3:24 a.m. The same hour that used to mark pain now held something new. Stillness. Renewal. Outside, the street was quiet, but somewhere in the distance, a bell rang, slow and clear, the first chime of the early service from St. Mark's Church down the block. I opened the window. The cool air carried the sound inside. It wasn't lost on me that the hour that once drew blood now drew light. The world hadn't changed, but my place in it had. The room that once held fear now carried gratitude. The same night that nearly ended me had folded itself into peace. I looked toward the framed photo of Leonard on the shelf, his hand around mine on the day we signed our first business contract. I whispered softly, "We did it, love. It's over." The house didn't answer, but it didn't need to. The quiet was its own reply. The pen still gleamed under the lamp. Gold, precise, calm, a symbol of everything that had been turned back upright. I placed it neatly on top of the letter and turned off the light. From the window, the first rays of dawn began to spill through the sheer curtains, filling the room in pale gold. My hands, once bloodied at this same hour, now glowed in that morning light. The church bells rang again, softer this time, as if blessing the silence that followed. I stood by the window, breathing in the cool air, and closed my eyes. That night, blood touched the floor. But in that courtroom, truth touched heaven. The judge's face said it all.